Hey everybody, you're watching We the Fandom, where we discuss comic books, pop culture, and the fandom experience. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel to see more content. How's it going everybody? Jacob here at We the Fandom, and with our videos leading up to the release of Venom 2, in today's video I wanted to talk about the origin and history of Venom in Marvel Comics. Now first off, I do want to point out that there is a difference between the Venom symbiote and Eddie Brock. And I'm pointing that out because there have been a number of hosts for the Venom symbiote throughout the decades. While I will briefly mention them, I'm not going to go into too much detail. Instead, I'm primarily going to focus on the history of Eddie Brock, as he is the only host that we see in the Venom films. Now, as I talked about in my video on the symbiote race, which I will link in the description, the symbiotes are an amorphous, extraterrestrial race bred to go around the galaxy and find noble warriors to bond with in order to become agents of the cosmos. The Venom symbiote's first host was a Kree soldier named Tel-Kar, and at first, he met the qualifications to become a symbiote host, but after being tortured by the Skrulls for years and being betrayed by his fellow Kree, he became cruel and vengeful, which corrupted the symbiote. After the symbiote was separated from Tel-Kar, it was sent to Battleworld, where it bonded to Spider-Man, aka Peter Parker. While Spider-Man did revel in his new powers at first, over time he noticed the negative impact that the suit was having on him, and in this case the symbiote was actually corrupting its host, as it had already been mentally damaged by Tel-Kar. This will lead to one of the most iconic scenes in Marvel Comics, in which Peter Parker used the sound produced by the bell to remove the symbiote, as certain wavelengths of sound are a weakness to the symbiote race. Now that we've done a quick review of the symbiote's history, we'll get into Eddie Brock. As a young adult, Eddie would enroll in Empire State University's journalism program on an athletics scholarship, and upon graduating, he would move to New York City, where he would gain a job at the Daily Globe as well as marry Anne Weying, a woman that he had started dating while attending college. Eddie's big break as a reporter came when he intercepted a letter written to the Daily Globe by Emil Gregg, who claimed to be the serial killer known as Sin Eater. After contacting Gregg, he would begin writing exclusives on the Sin Eater until law enforcement convinced him to finally share the identity of the killer. He did so, and the edition of that paper sold out. And for all of 7 hours, Eddie Brock was famous. That was until Spider-Man captured and revealed the true identity of the Sin Eater to be Detective Stan Carter. This of course ruined Brock's career. He was fired from the Daily Globe and was forced to work for tabloids to make a living. Unable to fess up to his mistakes, his wife left him, his father disowned him, his future was virtually non-existent. He thoroughly hated Spider-Man and started an intense workout program in the hopes of relieving stress, all the while obsessively thinking about revenge on Spider-Man. On the same night and at the same church that Spider-Man had gotten rid of the symbiote, Brock showed up, having recently pondered the idea of suicide, and being a devout Catholic, he came to beg for forgiveness. The symbiote, sensing Brock's hatred towards Spider-Man, bonded itself with him and called itself Venom, which Eddie agreed to as it represented his resentment towards the tabloids he had been forced to write. Taking advantage of the symbiote's immunity to Peter's spider sense, Venom would ambush the hero a number of times. However, Eddie would also have to contend with the symbiote's desire to return to Spider-Man. After Venom attacked Mary Jane Watson at the couple's apartment, Spider-Man retrieved the sonic device given to him by Mr. Fantastic, which would help him blast the symbiote off of Eddie Brock's body. However, after learning that Venom and Eddie were permanently bonded, he realized that trying to fully remove the symbiote would cause Eddie to die. They would face each other again when Venom tried to kill Spider-Man using the same bell that he used to get rid of the symbiote in the first place. But Spider-Man would end up victorious once again, and Venom would be contained and sent to the super prison known as the Vault. Now Venom would escape twice from the Vault in his attempts to take down Spider-Man while also harassing his loved ones. On the second attempt, he teamed up with 2 other villains called Styx and Stone, but turned on them at the last second, as Venom wasn't willing to let anyone other than him kill Spider-Man. This caused Styx, who has the ability to instantly decay organic matter, to use his powers on Venom, seemingly killing the symbiote, leaving Eddie Brock a normal human, with him being sent to Rikers Island prison. Eddie would be placed in the same cell as the notorious killer Cletus Cassidy, and the two instantly developed a hatred towards one another. One night, the Venom symbiote, which seemingly survived its encounter with Styx, entered the cell and rebonded to Brock so they could once again seek their revenge. Unknown to Brock, however, the symbiote left behind an offspring which would bond to Cassidy, turning him into Carnage. Venom would end up capturing Spider-Man and fought him on an island in the Caribbean, seemingly succeeding in killing him. Afterwards, Eddie and the symbiote would decide to retire on the island before later finding out that Spider-Man had survived when the latter returned to tell him about the rampage that Carnage was on in Manhattan. Agreeing to help Spidey fight Carnage in return for his own freedom, the two were successful in defeating the new villain by using the sound system in Madison Square Garden to disrupt the Carnage symbiote. Spider-Man would use this opportunity to try and capture Venom as well with the aid of the Fantastic Four. After further adventures that would bring him into contact with many heroes and villains, Venom sought out Spider-Man at what was meant to be the final confrontation. He would use Spider-Man's thought to be dead parents as bait, though Peter would later learn that these were actually robots. Meanwhile, Peter would seek out Eddie Brock's ex-wife Anne Weying in order to learn as much about Eddie as he could. Their battle would take place at the Thrill real-world amusement park and would be interrupted by a group called the Wild Pack, who would in a roundabout kind of way cause the Ferris wheel to collapse onto Anne. Spider-Man would jump in to save her, and because of Eddie's continued love for Anne, he agrees to a grudging truce with Spider-Man, with each vowing to stay out of the other's way. And this is where Venom would become an anti-hero instead of a villain, at least for a time. And this is something that the comics seem to be leading to, as everything that Eddie did as Venom, he did to protect the lives of innocents, believing himself to have been one before Spider-Man ruined his life. But following his agreement with Spider-Man, Eddie would travel to San Francisco, and during the Lethal Protector storyline, Venom would find himself protecting a colony of homeless people, as well as fighting against the Life Foundation, who would capture Venom and force him to create more Spawn. This is the storyline that the first Venom film was based off of. The main villain was different. In the comic, the villain was the head of the Life Foundation. However, it was a guy whose son Venom had killed at one point, and so he sought revenge against him. Now, in this comic, also Spider-Man was there. He would actually help Venom fight the Life Foundation, and they would team up again during Maximum Carnage, when Carnage led a team of supervillains in a massacre throughout New York City once again. Over time, Eddie started to realize that the symbiote was turning into a monster, as it started to crave brains, causing Eddie to commit cannibalism a few times. But after a psychiatrist attempted to steal the symbiote after informing Eddie that it craved the chemical phenethylamine, which is found in the brain, Eddie would acquire some and feed it to the symbiote, returning its sanity. Later on, he would also learn that chocolate contained phenethylamine as well. While being chemically controlled by the government to become a counter-terrorist agent, Eddie's villainous side would rise again when he was sent on a mission to intimidate J. Jonah Jameson, but instead almost killed him. After being separated and rebonded with the symbiote, Eddie Brock would start to return to villainy, consuming the Carnage symbiote in order to make himself stronger, joining an iteration of the Sinister Six, a group of Spider-Man villains who team up to defeat him, though he would leave the team after they mocked the symbiote for its weaknesses. Things would end up getting even worse after his ex-wife Anne was approached by Spider-Man wearing a black suit, reminding her of Venom and causing her to commit suicide, once again driving Eddie to hate Spider-Man. After the failed attempt of a corporation to wipe out the world using symbiotes, Venom would discover that just as how his symbiote gave birth to Carnage, the Carnage symbiote was giving birth to another, and sought to raise the new symbiote to be his ally. But after the symbiote was implanted in a police officer, Venom and Carnage teamed up to stop him, but were defeated by Spider-Man and Black Cat. This new symbiote would be called Toxin, and he will show up again at some point. Unbeknownst to Eddie, the symbiote had been modifying his memories over the years, as well as his biochemistry to make him believe that he not only had cancer, but that the symbiote was the only thing keeping him alive. This resulted in Eddie actually developing brain cancer, and the symbiote attempted to forsake him and return to Spider-Man. During this whole thing, Eddie had a spiritual awakening and came to see it as basically a demon sent to punish him for contemplating suicide, and so he decided to sell his symbiote off in a supervillain auction, swearing off his life of vigilantism and to donate the money to charity. The symbiote ended up going to a crime boss, who passed it on to his son Angelo in the hopes that he would make something of himself. However, the symbiote was unimpressed with Angelo's cowardice and abandoned Angelo in midair, leaving him to fall to his death. After learning of Angelo's death, Eddie attempted to kill himself and ended up being hospitalized. Eddie would eventually get cured of his cancer by Martin Lee, aka the Negative Man's healing powers. And then after this, Eddie became a volunteer at one of Mr. Lee's soup kitchens. Mac Gargan, who had become the Venom symbiote's host after Angelo's death, attacked the soup kitchen, having sensed the presence of a former host. Gargan mocked Eddie for having given up the symbiote, but ironically, it abruptly tried to leave Gargan and return to Eddie. When this occurred, a white symbiote formed from the remnants of the Venom symbiote inside Eddie's body, being altered and fused to his white blood cells by Martin Lee's powers. This new symbiote would emerge from Eddie's body and repel the old Venom symbiote. Dubbing himself Anti-Venom, Eddie teamed up with Spider-Man to fight off the Thunderbolts and decided to call off his longtime vendetta after witnessing Spider-Man rescue an innocent old man. Anti-Venom even tried to cure Spider-Man of any remnants of the symbiote, but this almost entirely stripped Peter of his powers. Afterwards, Eddie would help Spider-Man take down Norman Osborn, deciding to officially become a hero, mostly focusing on street-level crime as well as healing people, eventually finding out that drugs were being pushed by Mr. Lee, and Anti-Venom, with the help of Spider-Man, were able to expose his true identity to the public. Now, Eddie Brock's time as Anti-Venom would actually come to an end during the Spider Island event. This is when a virus was released in New York City, giving all of its inhabitants Spider-Man's powers, but eventually mutating them into spider monsters. Anti-Venom would try and heal as many people as possible, which is one of the abilities that comes with his symbiote, and end up becoming the hero of the entire event when he agrees to give up the symbiote so that Reed Richards could use it to create a cure for all the citizens of New York City. Now, Eddie Brock's presence in Marvel was lessened after the loss of the Anti-Venom symbiote, but he would still appear from time to time. At one point, he was the host for the Toxin symbiote, leading him to return to villainy for a short time, but eventually joining and leading an anti-symbiote task force for the government, with his main enemy being Carnage during this time instead of Spider-Man like it had been for decades. It was during his time as the head of this anti-symbiote task force that he came into contact with the Venom symbiote once more, but again with a new host. that being Lee Price, a former Army Ranger who was using the Venom symbiote to run a group of criminals. Of course, he would end up reobtaining the symbiote, marking his first return to Venom in a little over a decade, if my memory serves me right. Now, while we did finally have Eddie Brock back as Venom, he really struggled up until really the latest comics that have come out, partially because of Eddie having to once again contend with the violent tendencies of the symbiote, but also all the new Venom lore that's been established. I mean, Eddie has had to face the original host of the symbiote, Tel-Kar, a once noble Kree warrior who was corrupted. At one point, he was taken to an alternate universe where he was part of a whole group of Venomized heroes where they had to fight off the symbiote-like race known as the Poisons. He gets stripped of the symbiote again during War of the Realms when Malekith, the Dark Elf, attempted to take over the 9 Asgardian realms, and Eddie basically has to temporarily use an artificial symbiote created by a mystical stone, but the symbiote ends up returning to him when all is said and done. But things with Venom would start to get really good when we get deeper into the Donny Cates run, which is easily the best run on Venom that there ever was. It was during this period that Eddie finds out that he has a son named Dylan, that apparently when his ex-wife had temporarily bonded to the Venom symbiote, it had caused her to become pregnant, and she gave birth to Dylan before committing suicide, leaving him to the care of Eddie's father, Carl. This is also the period when absolute carnage takes place. So you have Carnage going around collecting the DNA from everyone on Earth that's ever been a host for a symbiote, and using that DNA, Carnage would successfully reawaken Null, the symbiote god, which I've already sort of gone over in my video on the symbiotes, as well as the Ravencroft Institute, which I will link in the description below. And Null coming to Earth was absolutely amazing. I mean, when he woke up, he basically took over his old enemies of the Celestials, brought them to Earth, and just dominated everybody. He easily defeated the Sentry, which is like Marvel's version of Superman. He killed Eddie Brock almost right off the bat, and all of this was just due to him wanting to find Eddie's son Dylan, who was actually created by the symbiotes to one day defeat Null. Now, really, Dylan doesn't do a whole lot. He kind of temporarily scares Null because of the powers that he has, but basically what happens is that Eddie finds himself in the sort of like psychic hive afterlife, if you could call it that. Basically, anyone who's ever been a symbiote host who has died, a part of themselves are here in this kind of limbo, and after discovering Flash Thompson in there, who was a previous host for Venom, Eddie comes back to life and gains the Enigma Force, which is a power that comes from an alternate dimension known as the Microverse. And with this power, and with merging Mjolnir and the surfboard of the Silver Surfer together, Eddie's able to create a weapon that he uses to kill Null. And then afterwards, with all the symbiotes in the universe now freed from Null's control, they now see Eddie Brock as the new King in Black. And with this power, he can control the entire hive and use them to go around the universe to be heroes. But the downside to this is that because he is just a regular guy, he's not a god, using this power takes its toll and ages him rapidly. Realizing that he doesn't really have it in him to continue as a superhero, he passes the Venom symbiote onto his son Dylan. Now, I'm not sure if this will be permanent, as we saw with all the people that were hosts of the Venom symbiote after Eddie Brock. He had lost his Venom symbiote for years and then became Venom again, so I'm sure we'll get him back at some point. In terms of his abilities, I literally listed every one of the abilities of the symbiotes in my video about the symbiotes, so feel free to go watch that, but I'll quickly list some of the basic abilities of Eddie Brock as Venom. So, as the old Venom, he had enhanced strength, speed, agility, stamina, reflexes, basically everything physical in Eddie Brock's body was augmented. He could also create organic webbing, much like what Spider-Man had to make in cartridge form. And he also had the ability to block Spider-Man's Spidey sense. That's the basics, pretty much the stuff you'll see in Venom movies. So yeah, that's the origins, history, and abilities of Venom. If you guys have any questions about anything regarding Venom, feel free to post those in the comment section below. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Also hit that notification bell so you never miss a new video. I'll see y'all next time.